Hey everyone! In this video I'm going to be continuing my Hellboy coverage, covering the Short Stories Omnibus, Volume 1. This is the second video in my Hellboy series of videos. The first one is called Seed of Destruction, so be sure to watch that first if you have not. I'm going to be slowly making my way through the entire Hellboy story, just focusing on the main core Hellboy books. If you look at your screen here, you see the recommended chronological reading order of Hellboy, and I'm going to be covering all of the red highlighted books. So I've already covered the Omnibus Volume 1, Seed of Destruction. In this video, I'm covering the complete Short Stories Omnibus Volume 1. In the next video, I'm going to cover Volume 2 of that, and then back to the main core Hellboy series with Omnibus Volume 2, and then 3, and then 4. And that will give you the sort of full Hellboy story in a way, and it's going to be pretty exciting to go through them all. So in this video, covering that Short Stories Volume 1 Omnibus, and there's a whole bunch of short tales in here, and they are honestly all pretty fun. Some better than others, but they're all good in their own way. I especially like some of the tales where Hellboy goes to Mexico and his adventures there, and then of course, the Crooked Man story arc, which is going to be the basis of the movie coming out in a few months. The Crooked Man is a great, horrific, scary tale that I think is definitely ripe for an adaptation. Alright, let's dive into it now. Hellboy, Short Stories Omnibus, Volume 1. Hellboy, the complete Short Stories Omnibus, Volume 1. In this video, I will be covering Volume 1. In my next video, I will cover Volume 2. Written by Mike Mignola and art by Mignola and various other artists. So a lot of the short stories we have in this omnibus volume were published in a completely different order. But what this omnibus does is take all of those short stories and put them in chronological order. So that way you are experiencing the story the same way supposedly Hellboy did. Now, in the very first Hellboy Omnibus, Seed of Destruction, Hellboy's story began in the year 1944. That is when he was sort of born and summoned to Earth. So he had his origin in 1944. And then that volume jumped to the present day, which at that time was the year 1994. But what about all of the many Hellboy stories in those intervening years? Well, that is what we are going to have here. We are going to have various stories set between the years of 1944 up to 1993. In this Volume 1 video, I'm going to be covering the years 1947 to 1961, which spans 15 short stories, and in the Volume 2 video, that will be 61 to 93, and will span about another 17 short stories. Some of these stories are kind of short, maybe 2 or 3 pages, but some of them are quite lengthy. Alright, let's dive into it now, with the very first short story set in the year 1947 called Pancakes. Art by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. A very young little Hellboy is in a diner. He asks for breakfast. He wants noodles, but he is told by a military general that he can only have pancakes. Little Hellboy protests, "I don't like pancakes." The general tells him, "You've never had them before, try them." Hellboy says, "They're yucky." But the general forces Hellboy to eat the pancakes, and he loves it, of course. Hellboy having this single bite of pancakes and enjoying it has repercussions. In Pandemonium, the capital city of Hell, the demons are all screaming, and the Grand Duke of Hell named Astaroth is talking with his fellow demons, and they comment that now that Hellboy has eaten pancakes, he will never come back to Hell. While this story is meant to just be a quick gag, it does establish Hellboy's love of pancakes, and it also establishes the theme of Hellboy refusing to serve Hell, which will continue throughout the series. The next short story is Midnight Circus. Artwork by Duncan Fegredo and colors by Dave Stewart. This story is set in the year 1948. A young Hellboy is sneaking around BPRD headquarters. He got out of his room, he went through the halls, and he eventually made his way outside. Once outside in the nearby forest, Hellboy saw a poster for a spectacular circus that is coming to town. He decided to check it out. As Hellboy explores this creepy circus, he sees various animals in cages and many other spectacular sights. This is not just a normal circus. This circus is inhabited by demons from hell. One such demon is a woman named Gamori. Gamori is actually Hellboy's half-sister, and she is very vindictive to her younger brother. She actually lured Hellboy here as a plot to murder him. Little Hellboy at this time has no idea that this woman is his sister, though. Gamori eventually lures Hellboy into a tent. The tent appears to be for adults. It says gentlemen only, and it has various sexual kind of pictures at the front of it. But nevertheless, Gamori, she summons Hellboy inside, saying, "Come closer, no one will ever know." Hellboy, he does go inside, but as soon as he does, a man stops him. This man is Astaroth. He is a Grand Duke of Hell. He is also Hellboy's uncle, and Gamori's uncle as well. And he protects little Hellboy. He asks, "Now what have we here?" Hellboy, a little confused, answered, She told me to come here." Astaroth, annoyed by Gamori's plans, says, "Oh, I'm sure she did. Now come along, little child. You don't want to go in there, that's for the older boys. Do your parents know where you are? It's very late. A boy your age should be in bed." Hellboy to this says, "I don't have any parents." Astaroth questions, "No parents? Everyone has parents. Well, you must have someone that looks after you." Hellboy explains, "I guess the professor does." Astaroth tells Hellboy, "Well, don't you think he'll be worried? You should go back home, but before you do, you've come all this way. There's something you should see before you go." Astaroth brings Hellboy inside a tent with various pictures of sideshow freaks. One of them is a picture of a wooden boy that very much mirrors Pinocchio. Hellboy says, "Oh, I read that book." Astaroth continues, "Pinocchio, he ran away to the circus, didn't he?" Eventually, through the various imagery, we see how Pinocchio's story very much mirrors Hellboy's story now. Hellboy, like Pinocchio, ran away from home, and he wound up at the circus. And the circus was in many ways kind of scary. While this is going on, Professor Broom and other BPRD agents have realized Hellboy is gone, and they have ran out looking for him. Meanwhile, Hellboy back at the circus is still with this Astaroth. Astaroth, still talking of Pinocchio, gets to the part of the story where the whale swallowed up Geppetto. And Astaroth almost makes it seem like Hellboy has been swallowed by a whale, and that he is trying to find his adoptive father, Professor Broom. The imagery seems so real to Hellboy. Hellboy, in this imagery, he sees the professor, and the professor is all disheveled and sickly and cold. This imagery is all just an illusion portrayed by Astaroth, a way to kind of maybe trick Hellboy into something. This illusion of Professor Broom says he is very cold, and he wants some heat. Heat from maybe a flame? Hellboy, he doesn't know how he can help, but Astaroth tells Hellboy, "Well, maybe you can save him." Hellboy cries, saying, "I don't know how." Astaroth continues, "You do. You can feel it, can't you, boy? You can light a fire with a word." Astaroth is almost pushing Hellboy to use some sort of power deep within him, but this is scaring Hellboy, and finally he decides to just run away. So Hellboy, he runs and he runs. He's running away from this illusion of all these fish and this whale under this sea. He runs and he runs, and he manages to escape the circus tent, and he continues to run away. Astaroth and Gamori then talk. Gamori tells her uncle, "I told you your plan wouldn't work." Astaroth replies, "Well, he's young, give him time, he'll come around." Gamori says, "You're making a mistake. In time, he'll be the ruin of both of us. Kill him now, while you still can. Professor Broom and the BPRD agents are slowly closing in on Hellboy. Hellboy, he's still running through the circus. He comes across some monkeys, and they very eerily say his name. The monkeys then attack Hellboy. Hellboy fights them off. He continues running. Some of the other animals escape from their cages. A lion charges at Hellboy. Hellboy, he runs. Astaroth eventually stops all of these animals from attacking Hellboy, as that was not part of his plan. He does not wish for Hellboy to be killed. That is Gamori's plan, not his. Astaroth, he stops these animals, and he asks one of them, "I told you he was not to be harmed." The animal responds, "But she said it was okay." This very much annoys Astaroth, as he realizes Gamori has disobeyed his orders. Hellboy, he continues to run and escape. Eventually, he makes his way to a place called the Hobo Jungle, where some homeless people live by a train. There, some sketchy hobos try and attack Hellboy, and they almost capture him too, but Astaroth steps in and stops them from harming the boy. Eventually, Hellboy is saved by Professor Broom and the BPRD, finally finding him. Elsewhere, we see Astaroth punishing Gamori. He tells her, "Remember who you are, Gamori, and who I am. You will not touch him or plot against him, so long as I live." Gamori, she accepts her uncle's punishment, but she whispers to herself, "So long as you live, Uncle." Hellboy is finally with Professor Broom, and Professor Broom comforts his adopted son. Broom tells little Hellboy, "It's alright, my boy, it's alright." And Hellboy, he says that he'll never run away again, he promises. Broom responds, "It's all going to be alright." The next short story is called The Nature of the Beast. Artwork by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. This story is set in the year 1954. Hellboy travels to England in 1954 on orders from his father, Trevor Broom. He is visiting people part of an organization called the Osiris Club. They are a group dedicated to combating supernatural threats and preserving knowledge of the occult. And they also have ties to other mystical and secretive groups involved in various rituals and ceremonies to maintain their power and knowledge. The Osiris Club, they ask Hellboy to slay a dragon for them. A dragon called the St. Leonard Worm. 1400 years ago, it haunted the forest near here and killed and ate animals and children, as well as the few soldiers brave enough to ride out against it. Finally, a simple monk armed himself and went into the forest. There he fought the worm and drove it back into the hollow of the earth. In doing so, the monk himself was gravely hurt, and because of the nature of the place and the nature of the man, wherever that monk's blood fell, lilies grew. And now they have it on good authority that this dragon has come again, and that is why Broom sent Hellboy to them so that he could slay this dragon. The Osiris Club members then give Hellboy a spear, the very same spear used by that monk against the dragon many years ago. So Hellboy then heads off, and he enters this Leonard's Wood, and he approaches a clearing where he sees a statue of that same monk from the story. And then finally, this dragon attacks Hellboy. The dragon constricts Hellboy up against this statue, and it begins squeezing Hellboy, trying to crush him to death. Although Hellboy, he is right up against the statue, and the dragon is wrapped around both Hellboy and the statue. And as the dragon constricts, it breaks the statue, and the top of that statue breaks off, and the stone sword on it falls and kills the dragon. The Osiris Club members have been watching Hellboy through a crystal ball. They comment how their experiment in watching Hellboy fight this dragon was inconclusive. Their experiment was a failure. They have learned nothing. Oh well, They will continue to watch him, however long it takes, and hopefully in time, Hellboy's true nature will be revealed to them, be that for good or ill. As Hellboy walks away from his confrontation with this dragon, Hellboy has some wounds and he is bleeding from those wounds. And as he walks, some blood drips from Hellboy and falls on the ground, and where his blood dropped, some lilies sprouted, just like the lilies in the story with the monk, signifying that Hellboy is indeed a force of good despite his origins. The lilies growing from his blood symbolize purity, hope, redemption, contrasted with his demonic nature. This highlights his role as a hero. The next short story is King Vold. It is set in the year 1956. Artwork by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. Professor Broom, who in those days was the director of the BPRD, well, Professor Broom asks Hellboy to help an associate of his, another professor named Edmund Aikman, who is located in Norway. Hellboy, not wanting to deny a personal favor asked by Broom, accepts. So Hellboy, he goes over to Norway, and he meets this Edmund Aikman. And at first, Hellboy is impressed with Edmund. He is telling Hellboy all sorts of Norwegian folktales, and he seems very knowledgeable on local mythology and paranormal events. The two of them then travel to a remote location. Hellboy, when they arrive there, asks what they're doing here. Aikman explains that they are waiting for King Vold. Hellboy questions, King who? Edmund answers, King Vold, the flying huntsman. Legend has it that this flying huntsman once said, God can keep heaven for himself as long as I can go hunting here. And now he is doomed to hunt every night, riding through the air with his hounds. Many hereabouts have heard him, but few have seen him. Aikman further explains, I thought perhaps with you here, given what you appear to be, King Vold might be inclined to show himself. Maybe even stop and chat a while. What do you say? Hellboy a little reluctantly replies, I'm gonna have to fight this guy, aren't I? Aikman answers, fight? Oh, certainly not. King Vold is a phantom. I've never heard of him causing any harm. After a few moments, a strong gust of wind begins blowing. Wolf noises are heard. Ahoo! Hellboy asks, what is that? Aikman answers, the hounds. He's coming this way. Quick now, you get behind this rock and don't move until I say, trust me. So Hellboy hides and King Vold finally appears before Edmund. Edmund bows down saying, Hail, King Vold! King Vold responds, Ha! You are bold to face me, mortal. Dreadful apparition that I am. I wonder, are you bold enough? Would you dare perform a service for me? Edmund to this says, Yes, your majesty. King Vold continues, One of my wolf pack has gone lame. Hold him for me. I will return for him before dawn. Do this, and you shall be rewarded. Edmund responds, Yes, your majesty. Hellboy, still hiding behind this rock, he hears the word reward, and he realizes that this Edmund Aikman is most likely just using him. So King Vold leaves to go hunting for the night, while he leaves one of his wolves behind for Edmund to watch over. With King Vold now away for the night, Edmund calls Hellboy over and tells him to help him with this. Hellboy responds, I thought you were handling this, tough guy. Edmund to this says, Hey, listen to me. Any human who has ever helped King Vold has been paid in gold. Gold! I'll give you half if you help. Before Hellboy can even answer, the wolf attacks. So Hellboy has to push Edmund out of the way and fight the wolf back. So Hellboy and the wolf are trading blows, and Hellboy is just annoyed. He says to himself, Damn, I knew something like this was gonna happen. I knew it. Hellboy, he attacks the wolf, and the wolf eventually becomes a man, and then a Viking berserker. The creature continues attacking Hellboy savagely, eventually knocking Hellboy unconscious. Despite Hellboy losing the fight, he did succeed in stopping the wolf from leaving, which was what King Vold had asked for. Eventually, King Vold returns, and Hellboy is still knocked out. King Vold retrieves his wolf and takes it back. He is thankful that his wolf has been kept here for the night. Edmund, he now inquires about the reward that he was promised. The king, though, before getting to that, points to Hellboy and asks, "And who is this?" Edmund answers, this is just my servant, your majesty. I'm embarrassed to say he fainted at the sight of your magnificent hound." King Vold, unbelieving of this, replies, "I'm surprised to hear it. He looks like sterner stuff. Well, no matter. You have earned your reward. Take it." King Vold honors his promise to reward Edmund Aikman, and he starts making it rain gold coins out of his mouth. As Edmund tries to grab the coins, they burn right through his hands, and they turn to useless stone when they hit the ground. King Vold saw right through Edmund's lies. As the king begins to leave, he says, "Farewell thee, Hellboy," and then he refers to Hellboy by his real name, saying, "Anyungun Rama, farewell." As the king is then gone, Hellboy, he finally wakes up, missing this entire exchange. Hellboy returns to Professor Broom and tells him of what happened. And then we see Edmund Aikman at the end of the story has been reduced to a beggar in the streets of Copenhagen, extending his hands for coins, wrapping his hand in bandages where the hole now is. Our next short story is called Hellboy in Mexico. It is set in the year 1956. The artwork is by Richard Corbin, colors by Dave Stewart. Hellboy, he was sent to Mexico to investigate an outbreak of supernatural activity. It was bad. Vampires, witches, the whole 9 yards. Whole towns were being wiped out. Hellboy was actually sent there with 2 other BPRD agents, and they only lasted a few days before they quit and went home. Not Hellboy, though. He stayed. And he ended up teaming up with 3 luchador wrestlers, who happened to be brothers. Luchadors are wrestlers of a particular style popular in Mexico. See, these brothers, they were wrestlers, and they worked small towns for free meals and drink money. And one night, they stopped at a church to say their prayer before their next match. And they found a priest murdered there, and inside the church, something happened. They say they had a vision of the Virgin Mary, telling them that trouble was coming, and that they should quit wrestling and get ready to start fighting monsters. So, that is what they did. Hellboy and these 3 luchadors teamed up. They worked their butt offs all day, killing various monsters, and at night they partied like there was no tomorrow. And when the next day came, they would do it all over again. One day, one of those luchador brothers, the one named Esteban, well, he got drunk and he was in a daze, and he ended up stumbling outside and walking. He wandered off and he was taken by these monsters. Later on, Hellboy and the 2 other luchadors went to go look for their missing brother, but they could not find any trace of him. Eventually, they went back to killing monsters, and they also tried to question some of these monsters, but they weren't getting information. Until, finally, they found a message for Hellboy to go to a Mayan temple and fight an evil luchador called Camazotz. And Hellboy was supposed to come and fight him alone. Hellboy, not one to back down from a challenge, arrived at this Mayan temple. He walked in alone. There was all sorts of ghouls and zombies in the audience, and there was a wrestling ring set up in the middle. Hellboy, he went in the middle of that ring preparing to fight. And eventually that Camazotz entered the ring. Hellboy soon realized that this wrestler was in fact the missing luchador brother. A bell was rung, the zombies in the crowd were chanting, "Camazotz, Camazotz, Camazotz." The match begins. They trade a few blows, but the wrestler is tossing Hellboy around, doing all sorts of flips and suplexes and drops on Hellboy. The zombie crowd is still chanting, "Camazotz, Camazotz, Camazotz." Eventually, this wrestler removes his mask, revealing he is now some sort of vampire bat hybrid man. Camazotz tells Hellboy, "I trusted you. You see what they did to me? Because you weren't there." Camazotz beats Hellboy some more. Hellboy responds, "I'm sorry, kid. You're right. I should have been there for you. Well, screw that. I'm here now." Hellboy, he thought to himself, "This is the only thing I can do for him now." Hellboy grabbed Camazotz and impaled him on a wooden stake, set up in the corner of the ring. The vampire man returned back to his human form for just a few moments. Esteban, now a human, once again told Hellboy, "Gracias, amigo. Gracias." And then he died. Hellboy, he helped bury the dead brother with the other luchadors, and then they left and he never saw them again. Hellboy, a little bit depressed, then started drinking heavily, and the next few months were a blur to him. And finally, after several months, a couple BPRD agents found him blacked out in a bar. And that was that, and he returned home. The professor was pretty mad over it for a while, but the killing stopped, so there you go. Continuing on Hellboy's Mexican adventures, the next short story is Hellboy vs. the Aztec Mummy. The artwork is by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. We are still in the year 1956. Hellboy, he tracks down an Aztec mummy. The Aztec mummy turns into a bat, and it picks Hellboy up and flies him up into the air. And then it drops Hellboy over a church. Hellboy, he crashes through that church roof, falling to the ground inside. Hellboy, he leaves the church and heads out into a nearby graveyard, and that Aztec mummy turned bat is there. Hellboy goes to confront the bat, and then a whole bunch of reanimated corpses attack him. The bat says to Hellboy, "You see, my people know me still, even to the dry marrow of their bones. They remember who gave them the corn." The animated corpses then make reference to the Aztec supernatural entity known as Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl is the Aztec or Mayan creator god who is also the patron of rain, science, agriculture, and much more. So that is perhaps the origin of this Aztec mummy / bat. Hellboy manages to finally get the upper hand on these reanimated corpses and this bat creature, and he punches the bat creature in the head. And then the bat turns into a snake, and then a giant floating Aztec head appears in the sky. It chants some creepy shit, "Unang ugath ut gathal," and then it disappears. And Hellboy, he then fell asleep in that graveyard with a bottle of alcohol by his side. Still in the year 1956, our next short story is Hellboy Gets Married, artwork by Mick McMahon and colors by Dave Stewart. Hellboy is still partaking in his drunken stupor in Mexico. Hellboy is arguing with a man down there, and they are discussing if the hero Lobster Johnson was real. Hellboy says he was, when he knew a guy when he was a kid that saw him in action, guns blazing. Hellboy, still drunk, he wanders the streets, and he sees who he thinks is a beautiful woman. They go through a night of partying, walking through the street, following a mariachi band as they sing. This woman also makes several references to Hellboy being a king. Her king. She might have just been saying this flirtatiously, but perhaps she knows of the prophecy of him being destined to be the ruler of Pandemonium in Hell. The night continues and their partying goes on, and they eventually wind up in a church. And in that church, they get married. The priest, he says, "And do you take this woman to be your wife according to the rite of Holy Mother Church?" Hellboy answered, "I do." The priest then said, "In this life and after, bound to you for all time." And then a ring was placed on Hellboy's finger. Afterwards, they went back to a hotel room where Hellboy passed out. And after sobering up a bit, he looked at his new wife, and oh no, Hellboy finally notices her demonic appearance, which, when he was drunk the night before, was kind of masked. His new wife looks at him with a scary look on her face, and Hellboy's nervous. Hellboy then looks down at the ring that is on his finger and he tries to pull it off, and all of a sudden the ring turns into a snake. Hellboy to this comments, "Well, that's not good." The snake ring says to Hellboy, "You swore an oath, bound to you for all time." Hellboy replies to the snake ring, "Screw that, I want a divorce." And then Hellboy's new demonic wife pounces on him, screaming, "Ha!" Hellboy comments to himself, "I gotta stop drinking. Lady, I don't want to." Hellboy's wife says, "Bound to me forever." Hellboy replies, "Sorry." And then he blasts his wife with his gun, and she flies to the other side of the room. Hellboy, he then books it and starts running, saying, "Gotta go." His wife, though, she pursues and says, "You cannot escape. You're mine. You swore an oath." Hellboy, he's running outside. He runs into a whole bunch of dead guys who may have been who they were partying with earlier. He kills a whole bunch of them, but Hellboy's wife is still trying to attack him. Hellboy manages to grab a spear and he impales his wife with it. His wife, slowly starting to die before she goes, says, "Ah, my king, husband, in this life and after." And then she turns to bones, and then the bones crumble to the ground. Hellboy, he walks on. Our next short story, still in the year 1956, covering Hellboy's drunken stupor days in Mexico. The storyline is called The Coffin Man. Art by Fabio Moon, colors by Dave Stewart. Hellboy is in a bar in Mexico, talking with some others. He's telling them all about when he got married. He says, "She was the most beautiful woman I ever saw. Kind of woman that could really make you do just about anything. And then when I woke up, the wedding ring could talk." One of the Mexicans in the bar that Hellboy was talking to replies, "Ah, senor, we've all been there." And moments after that, a little girl runs into the bar and says, "Help, help, my uncle." A patron in the bar says to the girl, "Maria, you know we buried your uncle yesterday." The little girl continues, I know, the Coffin Man has him." Hellboy asks others in the bar, "The who?" The others in the bar tell Hellboy, "There's nothing to be done, senor. He's a witch." Hellboy, he still follows the little girl and wants to try and help her. The little girl brings Hellboy to the cemetery. She explains that her uncle died recently and she loved her uncle very much. And this Coffin Man, he comes to steal bodies, and she didn't want that to happen to her uncle, so she came to watch over his grave. And the Coffin Man, he already had my uncle when I got here. But see, there he is. The little girl then points in the distance at a man with a donkey. Hellboy tells the little girl to go run home now. He'll handle this. Hellboy walks over to this Coffin Man, who just seems like an old, decrepit man with a black hat and a donkey hauling a dead body. Hellboy yells at the man, hey, jerk!" The Coffin Man, he then turns into some sort of vulture and begins flying in the air. He tells Hellboy, "Fool, leave me to my work. Tend to the living. The dead belong to me." The little girl's dead uncle seemingly sits up. He climbs out of the cart and begins running away. And then the donkey that was hauling that cart all of a sudden turns into some sort of jacked muscle man donkey standing on two legs, and it begins fighting Hellboy. The Coffin Man, as the vulture, tells the donkey, "Hurt him, Gurgle, but try not to kill him. There's something interesting about this one." At the end of the story, we see that Hellboy had lost the fight, and he's mangled lying on top of a cactus. And the little girl's uncle, well, he got away. The next short story is The Coffin Man 2, The Rematch. Art by Gabriel Ba, colors by Dave Stewart. Hellboy is pissed that he lost his first match with the Coffin Man, and he wants a rematch. Hellboy, he goes to seek the help of a woman, a witch. He explains to the woman that he spent the last 2 weeks sitting in graveyards every night, watching graves, waiting for the Coffin Man to return, and he's sick of waiting for him to show up. If the Coffin Man won't come to Hellboy, Hellboy wants to go to the Coffin Man. So, the woman says she'll help as long as Hellboy pays her. Hellboy tosses the woman some coins. Then the woman starts doing some magic, and she warns Hellboy, "You know, most living men pray they never see the Coffin Man. And the dead? Do the dead pray? I don't know, but if they do, they pray he passes them by." Hellboy to this says, "Yeah, well, I've got a score to settle with him. Him and his donkey." The woman continues doing some magic, and then eventually, a house appears in the distance. She tells Hellboy, "They say no one ever sees his house because it is in hell, but see? There it is. Only I can do this because I know his true name. His name when he was just a man. That was long ago. Do you want his name? It will cost you extra." Hellboy does not care for the man's real name, and he begins walking to the house. The woman bids Hellboy farewell, saying, "Well, good luck to you then, senor. I think we will never see you again." So Hellboy, he walks over to this house. He goes inside. It is very decrepit and dark in there. There is a vulture sitting on a shelf. And then Hellboy sees the Coffin Man sitting by a fire. Hellboy calls out, "Hey you, Coffin Man, where's your donkey now, pal? Guess it's just you and me, so why don't you..." All of a sudden, the vulture on the shelf starts talking and says, "The witch should have better known than to lead anyone to my house. I had to punish her for that." Hellboy questions, "You killed her?" The Coffin Man answers, "I'll bring her back like all others, and when I do, she'll be mine. And maybe I'll keep her. But you, I've been waiting to see you again. Oh, I would love to see my magic pitted against yours. What would that be like?" Hellboy to this says, "Screw that. I don't use magic." The Coffin Man to this says, "Of course you don't. How could you? Drunk and stupid as you are now, I wouldn't trade you for poor old Gurgo, the donkey who pulls my cart." Hellboy, he then gets ready to punch the Coffin Man with his right hand. Hellboy, he yells, "That's about enough out of you." The Coffin Man, not even nervous at all, replies, "Ah, and there it is, the hand. And all you use it for is hammering nails and breaking bones. You are the mountain that tries so desperately to be the molehill. You should be a lion. But instead, I wonder, is it even possible for you to grow into the thing you are meant to be? Not in this lifetime, I think." Hellboy, he charges at the Coffin Man, and then the Coffin Man, he spits out some sort of magic. And then Hellboy, he temporarily turns into a monkey, and he stumbles outside, and the Coffin Man disappears. Hellboy, he passes out on the desert floor there, and when he wakes up, he is no longer in monkey form. Hellboy sits up. He's a little dazed, trying to remember where he is, and then he looks down and asks, "Where the hell are my pants?" Crap. And the Coffin Man is no longer there, and Hellboy has lost to him once again. Our final Hellboy in Mexico story, taking place in 1956, is House of the Living Dead. Art by Richard Corbin, colors by Dave Stewart. Hellboy is still mourning the loss of his luchador friend, Esteban, who turned into the vampire creature Camazotz, who Hellboy was forced to kill. Hellboy, through his mourning, is drinking a lot of tequila, and in order to fund his drinking, he is competing in luchador wrestling matches. As Hellboy is drinking one day, a man comes to visit him named Raoul. Raoul has a proposition for him. Raoul says that the man he works for is prepared to pay Hellboy $500 American to wrestle his champion. Hellboy thinks this is sketchy. That's a lot of money for one match. Hellboy denies this request. Raoul then offers Hellboy $1,000. Hellboy, he still denies the request to wrestle this champion. Raoul to this responds, "I hoped it wouldn't have come to this." Raoul pulls out a picture of a woman named Sonia Montejo, and she is tied up to a chair and has a knife to her throat in the photograph. Raoul, he explains, "My boss says if you don't come, he'll kill the girl." So Hellboy goes with this Raoul man to his boss's home. Raoul's boss lives somewhere remote in a big mansion. Inside the mansion, there is a wrestling ring with a Frankenstein-type creature inside, and outside the ring are all sorts of science equipment from various experiments. Before Hellboy goes into this wrestling ring to fight this champion, Raul's boss presents himself. Raul's boss is a Dr. Jose Louis Kogan. Jose is a mad scientist, and he claims that he created this Frankenstein-type creature. Jose shakes Hellboy's hand, and then Jose has one of his assistants named Tupo bring out this Sonia Montejo. Jose tells Hellboy that he will keep his end of the bargain once he fights his champion. So, Hellboy he goes into the wrestling ring. The Frankenstein creature is zapped with some electricity to wake him up, and then the match begins. Jose, he tells Hellboy, if you win, she is yours. If he wins, she belongs to him. So Hellboy, he punches the Frankenstein creature in the face a couple times. He tells the creature, come on, pal. I don't want to put on a show for this guy, just fall down. Dr. Jose Louis Kogan, wanting to really test the strength of his Frankenstein, he yells, fight back! Fight! 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 Eventually, the Frankenstein creature listens and begins fighting Hellboy back. The Frankenstein grabs Hellboy and tosses him at the ropes. Jose, getting excited, says, yes, that's it, all right. The Frankenstein creature then gives Hellboy one big right punch to Hellboy's face, and Hellboy, a little zonked out, falls into the corner. Jose goes over to Hellboy and tells him, oh, you should not feel too bad. He is my finest creation. Years in the making. We see a very quick flashback to Jose with this Frankenstein creature in the past. A whole bunch of little demons from hell came to see this Frankenstein creature, and they tell Jose, this is some very good work, Doctor. Jose replied, ha! Then you go back to hell and tell your master that I am more powerful than he is, for I have the power to create life. The little demons respond, but Doctor, this man of yours, how strong is he? Jose to this says, strong? Shall I unchain him? I wager he is more than a match for any of you. The little demons to this say, no, not us, but there is another not far from here. We wish for you to match your creature against him. And that creature was Hellboy. So that is why Jose wanted Hellboy to fight his Frankenstein. Jose, now in the current, shouts out to Hellboy, and all the princes and ministers of hell will smile upon me with rewards if my creature bests you. So Jose's Frankenstein continues beating on Hellboy, slamming him on the wrestling mat. Hellboy is even bleeding a bit. The Frankenstein creature, though kind of dumb, is wandering around a bit, and does not seem interested in killing Hellboy. So Jose's assistant, Tupo, starts whipping the Frankenstein. Frankenstein, he turns around, he grabs both of Tupo's legs and rips Tupo in half, killing him. He then tosses Tupo to some electrical equipment in the room. Tupo's body gets electrified and it starts causing a fire in the room. The Frankenstein creature then turns its attention to Dr. Jose Louis Kogan. And Jose, now scared, says, no, go back. I am your master. Obey me. You will obey me. In another room, Raul is with the hostage, Sonia Montejo. Sonia is telling Raul, listen to me. Something terrible is happening. Please, we have to get out of here. I have to go home. Raul says, I can't. But Sonia continues, please, I know you. I know you're not a bad person. I know you love me. We have to go. Raul eventually listens to Sonia and he gets her out of here before the place burns down. Meanwhile, Hellboy still in the middle of that wrestling ring. He stands up from being dazed. He notices the place is on fire. He tries to leave. Some of Dr. Jose's shittier Frankenstein-type creatures start trying to attack Hellboy, but Hellboy, he brushes them aside and he manages to escape in time. Elsewhere, we see that Raul and Sonia have also left the house. They are running outside, but then Raul, he looks up in the sky and he notices that the moon, a full moon, is starting to shine through. Raul is actually a wolf man, and he does not wish to hurt Sonia. He tries to hold his transformation back, but he can't. He tries to warn Sonia to go, but then the transformation starts happening. he starts becoming more hairy. He is now in his wolf form, and he howls at the moon. Ahoo! Sonia, she starts running. Hellboy, elsewhere, he hears that howling and comments to himself, "Damn, I don't like the sound of that." Sonia, she's continuing to run. She sees a crypt, and she heads for it. And Raoul, now in wolf form, chases after her. Inside that crypt is a coffin there with a vampire that is slumbering. Sonia, she frantically searches for a weapon, and she finds a sword there. She unsheaths the sword and holds it in her hands. Raoul, he pulls out a gun from his pocket. He aims the gun, but then Hellboy tackles him. But Raoul, he loses control of the gun, and he accidentally shoots Sonia in her chest. Hellboy and Raoul, the Wolfman, they're fighting. Sonia, she is down in the crypt, bleeding. Some of her blood splattered off of her and into the skeleton in the nearby coffin. That skeleton, now seemingly being able to taste the blood, starts turning into a vampire. Hellboy, he continues wrestling with Raoul. He grabs the gun that Raoul dropped and he picks it up and he shoots Raoul with it. Hellboy, he then goes down into the crypt to check in on Sonia, and Sonia is dead. The vampire down in that crypt, he then wakes up and he says to himself, "Yes, I live again." But Hellboy merely grabs a silver sword nearby and stabs that vampire with it, killing him before he gets a real chance to wake up again. Raoul, he is slowly dying from the gunshot wound that Hellboy inflicted on him. Raoul, he says to himself, "Silver bullets. I meant to use them to kill myself, but I was never strong enough. Sonia, forgive me." And then, because this story wants to just shove in almost every major universal monster we know, a mist starts forming down there. And then a whole bunch of vampire brides arise from the dead. Hellboy, he's carrying Sonia's body out of that chamber. And the vampire brides tell Hellboy, "You failed to save this one. Failed to save the other, the boy, Esteban. You weren't there when he needed you most. Because you weren't there, you drink to forget. But you can't forget. Our kisses, though, will make you forget." Hellboy, he is struggling to get free of all these vampire brides. Raoul, still clinging to life, no longer in his wolfman form, he crawls down into that crypt. He crawls over to a nearby cross. The cross had a tarp over it, blocking its image, but Raoul, he pulls the tarp off, revealing the cross, and the holy vision of that cross starts burning up the vampire brides, and they combust into flames. Everything burns around Hellboy, and the crypt also burns down. Hellboy, as he is trying to make his way out of the flames, he remembers his old luchador friend, Esteban. He imagines Esteban saying to him, "Hellboy, you couldn't save me, but I know you tried. And she, Sonia Montejo, also knows you tried." Hellboy continues making his way through the flames. He replies back, "I did try." The main theme we're supposed to get out of this story is that Hellboy is a hero, and he is learning to accept that he can't save everybody, no matter how hard he tries. Hellboy eventually manages to make his way out of the rubble of that burning building, and he walks, and he eventually arrives at a nearby bar, and he goes inside and orders a drink. And then, Jose's Frankenstein monster joins Hellboy in the bar, and the two of them drink together. The Frankenstein creature then tells Hellboy, "He said he made me, but it's not true. He bought me from a carnival. I don't know where I come from or where I'm going." Hellboy to this responded, "Amen, brother." Eventually, as Hellboy leaves that bar, he sees a funeral procession of the dead. Raoul, also dead, is there walking with some skeletons, and they are carrying the dead body of Sonia Montejo. Hellboy, he tells Raoul, "After the crypt collapsed, I tried to dig her out." Raoul responds, "I promised I would bring her home." That is what I'm doing. As Hellboy continues to watch this funeral procession continue to walk away from him, Hellboy's uncle, Astaroth, appears from out of the bar. Astaroth says, "You chose to live a man's life. Live and suffer like a man. You can do that, but you will never be a man. You will never know the peace of the grave. You were born from hell and bound for hell in the end." Hellboy, he then continues to drink and walk on. So this is the end of the Mexican chapter of Hellboy's story. He was mourning the loss of not being able to save this friend of his, Esteban, and others. And it caused Hellboy to start drinking heavily and lose about 5 months of his life to the bottle, just in a drunken haze. Now this story is set in 1956, very early on in Hellboy's life. But if we contrast this to the Hellboy we see in the Seed of Destruction story arc, which is set in the year 1994, we see a much more mature Hellboy. In that story arc, when Hellboy's father, Professor Broom, died, rather than turn to alcohol again, Hellboy instead went and solved the case. So we see an evolution of the character there. Alright, our next story arc is The Crooked Man. Art by Richard Corbin, colors by Dave Stewart. This storyline is set in the year 1958, and this is probably the meatiest storyline in this short story omnibus. This is also the basis of the new The Crooked Man Hellboy movie coming out in a few months. And I do have to say, while Hellboy is kind of a horror book in some ways, most of the storylines are still pretty fun and not very scary, but The Crooked Man is, I think, probably one of the most horrifying and scary of Hellboy's stories, and easily one of the creepiest. Like, I think a small child would get nightmares from this story. Okay, let's dive into it now. The Crooked Man. The year is 1958. Hellboy has been sent to the Appalachian Mountains in Virginia. He is here to investigate some supernatural going-ons. Hellboy's in a cabin with some people. They are standing over the body of a dead woman. Hellboy asks the 3 men there, "You didn't think to maybe take her to a doctor?" The 3 men respond, "No medicine doctor's gonna do her a speck of good, son. She's witched." Hellboy questions, "How do you know?" The man responds, "This child didn't have no sense. I seen her fighting with Cora Fisher the day before yesterday, and everybody knows that Cora's a witch." As they are talking, another local man walks into the cabin. He introduces himself as Tom Farrell. And Tom, he says he knows that Cora Fisher girl, that witch that they're talking about. He says, "I knew her years back, and she weren't a witch then." The other men in the cabin are surprised to see Tom. Yeah, he's originally from these parts, but he hasn't been here for decades. Tom, he then holds out his hand and says, "I found one of these on the doorstep." Hellboy investigates what the man is holding. It is something called a witch ball. A witch ball is a small, spiky little object imbued with black magic. In order to create one, witches have to meet in an elaborate ceremony on a Friday the 13th at a graveyard. They have to mix a whole bunch of disgusting stuff together, like weasel, tail of rat, guts and bladder of a black cat, buzzard eggs, baby nails, foot of toad frog, brain of bat. The witches then have to boil all this stuff together, and then they have to do some sort of elaborate ceremony. And finally, once the witches have created a witch ball, they can enact a curse upon whomever the witch strikes with that ball. And in order to remove that curse, the ball must be burned, and the victim's clothes need to be boiled while the witch's name is recited. So Hellboy, he's looking at this witch ball. He claims to have heard about these, and they all see in the room that this dead woman on the floor had a mark on her chest, where the witch ball was thrown at her and it bruised her. Hellboy asks this Tom Farrell, where can he find this Cora Fisher so he can talk with her? Tom tells Hellboy to follow him. So Tom and Hellboy leave. Before Tom heads out though, he tells the men there, You burn that witch ball, and you take the girl's clothes off and boil them, calling Cora Fisher's name. If she's the one that done this, then that'll bust the spell. Tom tells Hellboy before they leave he wants to stop by and talk to his ma. But the other men there tell Tom, she's dead. Long time ago, brother came up to fetch her, took her back east someplace where her people are from. Tom then questions, oh yeah? What about my pa? The men respond, hell Tom, we never did see much of him, not since you left. Tom to this says, I guess my dad finally drunk himself to death back in the woods. Tom and Hellboy, they finally head off. Hellboy asks Tom, so, I guess you're from around here? Tom answers, yep, been gone 20 years though. I figured it was time to come back and see to some things. What brings you this way? Hellboy, not giving out much info, just says, I finished up some things down south and thought I'd wander around a while. Tom, he then tells Hellboy, I heard of you. I recognized you right off the bat. I saw a picture of you in Life magazine some years back. You were a cute little fella, like a little monkey. Guess you're all grown up now though, huh? Heard you scrapped with some vampires and such. Hellboy answers, yeah, a couple of times. Apparently, in 1948, a 3-year-old Hellboy appeared in the May 1948 issue of Life magazine. So, Hellboy is not a secret in the comic world he occupies here. He is a known public figure. As the two of them walk, they speak of their past. Hellboy explains how he was found back in '44 in an old church in England. Tom to this remarks, in a church you say? Well, that's fine. Everybody knows the devil can't set foot in a church. Hellboy replies, you know I'm not the devil, right? Tom to this says, the devil? No, I've seen him, and he don't look nothing like you. Oh, your Cora's place. Tom and Hellboy, they finally arrive at the cabin of this Cora Fisher woman. Before going inside, Tom calls out, hey Cora, it's Tom Farrell. Come out, Cora, I want to talk to you. There's no answer though, so Tom and Hellboy head inside. They look around, and inside that cabin, they find several witch balls, a scratched out Bible, and a large bug trapped in a bottle, hidden in the floor. Tom, as he's looking at that bug, he hears a voice calling out to him, and he realizes that this bug is Cora's demon familiar. The voice says to Tom, He knows you're coming. He's waiting. Hellboy, he interrupts Tom, and he calls Tom over to his side of the room, and he shows Tom what appears to be the empty husk of human skin on a bed. Hellboy asks, what do you make of this? Tom answers, it's your skin. We'll wait till she comes back for it. Tom shows Hellboy the bug in the bottle and says, this is her demon familiar. She's got it corked in there pretty good. While they're waiting, Hellboy asks Tom about supposedly the time he saw the devil. Tom, he decides to tell Hellboy his story. He says, 20 years ago, about a mile from this spot, I was maybe 15 years old then. I met a girl out there in the woods. Effie Kolb was her name. Tom says he knew right off the bat she was trouble, but well, she was pretty, and he was 15. Effie was a witch, and she started teaching Tom some things about witchcraft, and she got Tom thinking that maybe he should be a witch too. All that talk about having power over other folk? I don't know. Tom thinks she made it sound pretty good. One day, Effie convinced Tom to perform a little ceremony. So Tom, he found himself a squashed up black cat from out there in the woods. He went home, and while his mom was out, he boiled the cat until the cat all went to pieces. Tom, he then took that mess of the cat down to the creek to wash out the bones. And as he washed out the bones, he recited some things that Effie told him to say. Tom, he recited, in the name of Beelzebub, Succubus, and the Archangel of Hell, I pledge to be loyal to the devil the rest of my born days, to never pray to God again, etc., etc., etc. Effie told Tom that whatever bone he was holding in his hand when the devil showed up, that would be his so-called lucky bone. In the current day, Tom telling the story to Hellboy holds up that lucky bone. He still has it with him, hanging around his neck on a necklace. But yes, back when Tom was 15. So he had that little bone in his hand, and finally, a servant of the devil appeared to Tom. The so-called Crooked Man. Crooked Man was a local man that served the devil, a man named Jeremiah Whitkins. Local legend says that the Crooked Man has got himself a big house, and he was one of the first white men to come into these mountains hundreds of years ago. He was behind half of the trouble between the whites and the Indians, and that he was for the British in the Revolutionary War, and played both sides in the war between the states. Folks always say that he was only good for two things: causing trouble and making money from it. And that's what got him hanged in the end. But the chief devil in hell sent him back to hoard souls instead of gold. Little 15-year-old Tom, just seeing this crooked man, got scared straight. He took one look at him and all the bad thoughts fell right out of him. He no longer wanted to be a witch. He no longer wanted to be with this Effie Kolb. Tom, he ran home. And as he ran home, he sweared that he would be good again. When Tom arrived at his home, what did he see waiting for him on his front step? A toad. Tom, he just knew that this was his demon familiar. The Crooked Man had sent it to Tom to help him do evil. Tom, he was crying. He didn't want to do evil, so he just kept running. He didn't even say goodbye to his ma and pa. Tom, he just ran away from home. He hightailed it out of the mountains and hopped on the first train he saw. He didn't care where he was going, and eventually he wound up in the army, and they sent him to the Pacific. Tom, he got through the war without a scrape. Tom believes, though, it was because of this damn thing, this lucky cat bone of his. Tom tells Hellboy in the present, "This thing's got power in it, but I never used it. I never wished harm on anybody, not even those Japanese fellas." As Hellboy and Tom are talking, discreetly a raccoon enters the cabin from a window, and the raccoon crawls into Cora Fisher's skin, and it changes back into the girl. Cora is now awake. Hellboy and Tom go inside because they hear noise and they see Cora there lying on the bed, no longer just a pile of skin. Tom asks Cora, "What are you doing?" Cora, seemingly a little bit shocked at seeing Tom, who she hasn't seen for many, many years. She eventually breaks down and explains how she became a witch out of desperation, but she deeply regrets it. And as Cora is explaining her story, all of a sudden, the witch Effie Kolb arrives outside. Effie was the young witch girl that seduced Tom when he was a teenager. Effie yells out, "You hush now, Cora Fisher. No use weeping and wailing. You know you're bought and paid for." Hellboy, Tom, and Cora all rush outside to see the source of this voice. And there they see Effie Kolb riding on top of an old, worn-out horse. Effie, she says out loud, "Hello, Tommy." Tom tells Hellboy, "That's her, Effie Kolb, and she don't look a minute older since the last time I saw her." Effie continues, "Cora, you come along with me now. He might want to have some words with you." Tom yells at Effie, "You leave her alone, witch." Effie, she just continues mocking them, saying, "You really want to get messed up in this, Tommy? He knows you've come back. He's waiting for you." Hellboy, he asks, "What about me?" Effie to this replies, "You, mister, he's not a tiny bit afraid of you. Oh, and Tommy, I near forgot. The Crooked Man sent me to give you a present. I'm afraid he don't look like much. I've been riding him pretty hard every night since you left." Effie, she then flies off of this old, worn-out horse. This is the supposed present for Tommy. Effie, she then flies away laughing. "I guess he's pretty near wore out." So with Effie gone now, Tommy inspects this horse, and Tom removes the horse's bit from the horse's face. The horse's bit is like that apparatus that goes on the horse's head and face that you use to control the horse. Well, apparently the horse's bit was cursed, and by removing it all of a sudden, the horse turns back into Tom's father. So it turns out that the witches have secretly been controlling Tom's father as a horse for decades. Cora in horror comments, "Oh, Tom, it's your pa! I swear I didn't know nothing about this." Tom, looking at his dad now back in human form, says, "I guess he didn't drink himself to death after all." Tom's father, looking at his boy, says, "You come home, you come home." And then Tom's father dies. The Crooked Man, Part 2 of 3. Hellboy, Tom, and Cora, they set off up the mountain to a church so that they can bury Tom's father. Tom also wants to see if he can free Cora from the holds the Crooked Man has over her. They walk for a while, but eventually Cora grows nervous and says that she can go no further. Hellboy asks her, "What's wrong?" Tom answers, "It's the mines. They're full of Melungian witches, descendants of the original settlers from Roanoke. There's all kinds of crazy stories about them. They're supposed to be a special kind of evil." Cora, she says it's true. She doesn't want to go on. All of a sudden, some of these deformed witches start flying in the sky. They call out to Cora, saying her name, "Cora Fisher!" Cora screams, "They know my name!" Tom tells Cora, "Cora, those witches haven't gotten any power over you, and no power at all until after dark." But then, all of a sudden, the sky goes black, and it becomes night. Hellboy's confused. He says, "I don't get it. It shouldn't be past noon." Tom is maybe rethinking their strategy of where they're walking. He says, "Maybe I messed up coming this way. We're on the devil's time now." They all start walking faster. These deformed witches are continuing to call out Cora's name. "Cora Fisher, Cora!" And then, oh shit, Cora bursts into a mass of insects, snakes, and frogs, just spewing from her mouth. And then she explodes into a swarm of these creatures. And these creatures start swarming Hellboy and Tom. It looks like they're all going to be done for, but then somehow Tom, using that lucky bone that he wears around his neck, manages to free them from the swarm. Cora's dead, but Hellboy and Tom, they continue walking on. The witch Effie appears and she mocks Tom, saying, "You used your power, Tommy, the lucky bone. He gave that to you and you finally used it. If he didn't own you before, he sure as hell owns you now." Hellboy tells Effie, "Shut up," and he blasts her with his gun, but Effie seemingly disappears. Hellboy comments to Tom, "Kinda wish I'd taken a shot at her back when she was sitting on that horse." "Oh, I'm sorry, I mean your dad." "How far is that church?" Tom tells Hellboy, "Not far now." Hellboy and Tom, they walk on and they finally arrive at this church out there in the middle of the woods. Inside that church is a Reverend Nathaniel Armstrong Watts. The Reverend here is blind. He tells Hellboy and Tom that he was expecting them. He says, "She told me, this girl here, she'd come in a couple minutes before you fellas, bold as brass. It was a surprise, her being a witch. Don't you see her? Well, guess maybe she's a ghost." So Cora Fisher, dead, became a ghost, and she arrived at this church and pre-warned the Reverend of Hellboy and Tom's upcoming arrival. We can actually see Ghost Cora sitting on a pew. The Reverend tells Tom and Hellboy, "The devil might have got her body, but he didn't get her soul. Lord be praised for his little mercies. I know what you come for, and we'll get your pa buried right and proper. Don't you worry on that, but we'll hold off doing it till morning." Hellboy then stares outside and comments, "Good idea." Slowly, a whole bunch of witches surround the church ground. The priest explains that there are a lot of witches around these parts. Always have been, but used to be more regular folks too. Nowadays it's mostly just witches. They come nosying around most nights, but this is consecrated ground. They can't touch it. They can't enter Their magic don't work here, day or night. Tom, he feels so guilty. He feels like he's all brought this on himself. He took up that Effie girl when he was a kid. He knew it was sin, but he didn't anyway. And he got her mixed up in witchcraft. The Reverend tells Tom that, yeah, he was a fool, and it's right that he suffers for it, but Lord knows Tom tried to straighten himself out, and he'll be fine. The witch, Effie Kolb, outside, she lets out a loud, "Tommy!" Hellboy stares out the window, seeing the crowd arriving. Finally, the Crooked Man, he arrives outside the church. The Crooked Man, he shouts out, specifically talking to the Reverend, "Let him go, old man! I ain't afraid of him, and I sure as hell ain't afraid of you. You've got Tom Farrell in there, and that boy owes me something, and I've come to collect." Hellboy, the Crooked Man, Part 3 of 3. The Crooked Man calls out to Tom, saying, "Come on now, Tom, you and me had a deal. You wanted the witch power, and you've had it all these years. Surely you hardly ever used it, at least not in any way I'd like, but you still gotta pay for it. Fair is fair, Tom. Now you come on out now." Tom in the church is worried. He says, I'm done for." Reverend Watts yells back at the Crooked Man, saying, "You get out of here, devil! Whatever mistakes this boy made, he's come home to the Lord now." The Crooked Man to this just laughs. He says, "How long you gonna hide in there, Tom? You're mine." Hellboy, he's tired of listening to this back and forth. So he steps outside, ready to face down the Crooked Man. As soon as Hellboy does step outside, pickets fly off the fence. They fly in the air and they stab right into Hellboy. Hellboy retreats back into the church and pulls out the pickets from his body. Reverend Watts, he grows furious. He yells out, "Enough!" And then he refers to the Crooked Man by his real name. He says, "Jeremiah Whitkins, you want this boy? You come up here and fetch him yourself." The Crooked Man, he tries to tempt the Reverend into giving Tom over. He tells the Reverend, "I'll buy him from you. I can't help but notice the sad state of that old church. It's a real shame. How much you figure it would cost to fix her up?" The Crooked Man then makes a whole bunch of gold sprout from the ground, right in the middle of that church. The Reverend is unmoved. The Crooked Man, he then asks, "Well, what if we shaved off 10 years on you? Or 20? And what if we fix up those old eyes of yours?" All of a sudden, the Reverend becomes 20 years younger, and his sight returns to him. Reverend Watts, he denies the Crooked Man's gifts. He says, "No, sir. I come fairly by my years and all my afflictions. I don't want nothing else." The Crooked Man comments to his allies, "He's a tough old nut, I'll give him that." The Crooked Man then brings a young woman back from the dead and has her try and tempt the priest. But he still denies the Crooked Man's temptations. The Crooked Man then slowly starts bringing back all the other dead buried there in that graveyard to life. Hellboy and Tom, they begin fighting the dead off. The Crooked Man is still yelling at the Reverend. He tells him, "Come on, be a sport and reach over there and snap Tom's neck for me. Fetch me that lucky bone of his and come on out of there and we'll have a good old time." The Reverend, hearing this, then realizes that the Crooked Man isn't after Tom's soul, really. It's that damn bone. That little bit of power they give him in hell. He can't stand to be parted with a nickel's worth. And you not using that thing for mischief is driving him crazy. It's like you're stealing from him. The Reverend, he then takes the lucky bone from Tom. And with his priest powers, he forces the Holy Spirit into the bone and forces the evil out. The Reverend, he then consecrates a shovel, makes it holy, and then he gives the shovel to Hellboy. And with the power of the lucky bone gone, and with that shovel blessed, Hellboy whacks the Crooked Man with that shovel, and In an instant, the crooked man vanishes, and the witches he was with run away. In the morning, once everything is over, the Reverend, Hellboy, and Tom finally bury Tom's father. Hellboy and Tom, they then leave the Reverend for a while, as they have to take care of something. They want to give the crooked man the cat bone back. So Hellboy and Tom, they march further into the woods, to where legend is the crooked man's house is. They enter the crooked man's house, only to find a tentacled creature embracing jars of gold. The tentacled creature says, "I know what you want. You've come for my gold, but you can't have it. It's mine." Hellboy, looking at what's left of the crooked man, comments, "Geez, that's kind of pathetic. I almost feel sorry for him." Tom responds, "I don't. You want this, you old bastard?" Tom, he then tosses the bone, now blessed, to the crooked man. And with that, the crooked man and his gold disappear. Hellboy and Tom then leave the crooked man's house. They start heading back to the Reverend's church. They're going to help him rebuild. But as they are walking back, they find Effie Kolb, the witch that they met earlier. Previously, she was a young teenaged girl, but now she is a very old woman, and she is helpless. Tom, seeing Effie Kolb, realizes that he's been holding on to the horse bit and bridle this whole time. So he places it onto Effie, and all of a sudden, she turns into a horse. Tom and Hellboy watch Effie the horse for a while. Tom, he comments to Hellboy, "This is not a very Christian thing to do." Hellboy replies, "I like her better this way." And we see Effie, now a horse, has the words, "Beware, I am a witch," painted on her side. And with this, we end the Crooked Man story arc. The next story arc, taking place in 1958, is The Penanggalan. Art by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. Hellboy in 1958 travels to Malaysia. A little Malaysian girl tells Hellboy that there was once an old woman who got so startled that she kicked her own head off. And then her head and her organs flew away to a treetop and became a demon. And they called that demon the Penanggalan. Hellboy comments, "That might be the stupidest thing I've ever heard. No offense." The little Malaysian girl takes Hellboy to this Penanggalan's cave. There, inside that cave, Hellboy sees the body of this Penanggalan. But upon further inspection, Hellboy realizes that this can't be the current demon that's plaguing the area. There must be another. Hellboy, he turns around and sees the little Malaysian girl he was talking to. Well, she's now headless, and her body falls to the ground. And it turns out that that little girl was this new Penanggalan the entire time, and she attacks Hellboy, tangling him in her organs. Hellboy, annoyed, he says to himself, "I knew it! I knew it!" Hellboy, though, he runs outside the cave and he leaps into the sun, all while this demon was tied to him. By leaping into the sun, he manages to destroy the demon that burns up in the sunlight. Hellboy, he then lands on the ground below and says, "So much for you, pal." Our next story arc is called The Corpse. It is set in the year 1959. Art by Mike Mignola, colors by Matt Hollingsworth. In the year 1959, Hellboy arrives in Ireland to deal with a child abduction. Hellboy meets with the mother of the child that was abducted, a woman named Margaret Monaghan. Margaret shows Hellboy a baby in the room, and she says, "That thing over there, that isn't my Alice. I know it, I know it. When my husband's away, it laughs at me and it says things, awful things." Hellboy goes over to inspect the baby. Talking to the baby, he says, "You look pretty good to me." "Yes, you do." "Is your mean old mother crazy?" "I think she is." I've got something for you. What do babies like? Babies, they like iron. Hellboy then holds out an iron horseshoe to the baby, and this makes the baby start freaking out because this baby is not actually a baby. It is actually a fairy creature named Grugach, and it was sent here to shapeshift and take the place of the baby that they did actually kidnap. So this Grugach, seeing the iron horseshoe, yells out, "Eee! I'm found out!" Hellboy then picks up the baby creature, and the baby creature begins yelling, "Stop! Stop it, Burns! You're killing me!" Hellboy asks this Grugach, "Where is the baby?" Grugach responds, "Ow! Take that iron off of me! Ah!" Hellboy to this says, "You tell me where that baby is and I'll let you go." Hellboy demands that the creature talk. Eventually, Grugach says, "Get to the crossroads by the strike of middle night, under the corpse tree. Look you for 3 rough little men, and do as they bid. I can say no more." Hellboy lets the creature go. The creature, Grugach, flies out of the chimney and away. The parents of the missing little girl ask Hellboy, "Why'd you let that thing go? And where's my little Alice? What have they done with her? Where is she?" Hellboy tells the mother and the father that they need to calm down and trust him. He says, "Look, they're very weird little people, but they do play by certain rules. I promise to get your daughter back. Be patient, they won't harm her. This is an old game and I've got to play it their way." So Hellboy, he leaves the mother and the father, and he goes to this crossroads, as this Grugach told him to go there and look for 3 rough little men and do as they bid. And assuming Hellboy does do as they bid, they will give the girl back. So Hellboy, he arrives at this crossroads, he sees a man being hanged, and then he sees the 3 little men, who appear to be goblins of sorts. The 3 little goblins have a dead body with them they're dragging. The body they're dragging is of a man named Tam O'Clanny. Hellboy talks to the 3 men, and he makes a little deal with them, an agreement. The 3 goblins dragging the dead body of Tam O'Clanny like Tam, and he was a good friend of theirs, a lovely man. They tell Hellboy that if he takes Tam and gives him a proper Christian burial on a Christian burial ground, they'll find the missing little girl, this Alice Monaghan, and return her. Hellboy accepts their agreement. So Hellboy, he walks on with the body of Tam O'Clanny on his back. As Hellboy's walking away, the 3 goblins tell Hellboy, "Quick, now quick! See that Tam O'Clanny is in the grave by daybreak, and bury him in that church at Teampole Dimius, and if not there, then Carrick Fahad Vicoris, and if not there, then Imolgu Fata, and if not there, then it must be Kilbredia." So they tell Hellboy all these various places that he should try to bury this body. And then they tell him, "And do this work rightly, and the good people will be thankful to you. But if you fail, then the child is lost." So Hellboy, he needs to get this body buried by daybreak at one of these locations. So Hellboy, he walks on, and he eventually arrives at the first location, a church. Hellboy soon realizes that this is not going to work here, as the dead there call out, "No room, no room." So Hellboy, he leaves. He then walks over to a graveyard. And in that graveyard, the dead there call out, "No room, no room, no room." So Hellboy, he leaves. He talks to Tam and says, "Damn, I'm starting to detect a sort of grim pattern here, and you're not smelling any better." Hellboy, he then goes to this Almogu Feta place. As he is walking on the grounds to that place, he seems to get swatted back by something invisible, and he gets knocked over to the ground. Hellboy is confused. He says, "Geez, I didn't see anything." And after this happens a few times, he says, "This is ridiculous. Screw it. Let's go to this Kilbredia place." Out in the distance, a creature named Dagda, the king of the fairy, is watching Hellboy. Dagda realizes that it seems like Hellboy is going to succeed on his task. So Dagda tells some of his assistants to prepare the child, Alice Monaghan, to give her back, as they should honor their agreement with Hellboy here. Grugach, overhearing this conversation, can't believe it. He says to himself, "Bah! The king is a fool! This Hellboy mocks me! He has burdened me with iron! I will have vengeance!" Grugach goes and releases a giant beast, a boar-headed giant named Grom. As soon as Grugach releases Grom, Grom bites and eats Grugach. But then Grom turns his attention to Hellboy. This Grom attacks Hellboy. Hellboy, at first, he gets launched back. But then Hellboy looks through his pockets, tries to remember something that he had recently. He pulls out a little medallion. It came from the Vatican Library. It's a charm to use against demonic animals. So Hellboy, with that charm in his hand, punches Grom in the face. And the charm seems to work and Grom runs off. Finally, after a few more complications, Hellboy finally arrives at the place he needs to be to bury this Tam. Hellboy throws Tam in a grave and puts some dirt on top of him, and he succeeds in burying him in the ground before sunrise. And with the deal completed, one of the fairies appears before Hellboy. Hellboy tells the fairy, "I guess you owe me a baby." The fairy responds, "Well, done and done. Us fairy would have raised the child as one of our own, and no harm would have ever came to her." Hellboy responds, "Sure, why would she be a person when she could live under a log with you guys?" The fairy, a little bit annoyed by this remark, replies, "Unkind. No living child of our race has been born into this century, and no more will ever come. We know this. The years they beat upon us like the ocean upon a stone. We are worn away." Hellboy responds, "That little girl's parents don't care about that." Fairy to this says, "More is the pity. Soon I think King Dagda will gather us and march us down into the shadows under the world where the old people go. And soon we will be gone." So these fairies, they wanted this little girl, Alice Monaghan, and they wanted to raise her as their own because they can no longer have children and they are worried that their race is going to die out. But the deal is a deal, and they return this little girl to Hellboy, and Hellboy eventually gives her back to her parents. And the little girl that Hellboy saved here in the story, Alice Monaghan, is going to be returning back into the Hellboy story way in the future in the Wild Hunt story arc. Our next short story, taking place in the year 1960, is called Double Feature of Evil. Art by Richard Corbin, colors by Dave Stewart. A whole bunch of zombies are in a movie theater watching a double feature. The double feature they are going to watch are the two Hellboy stories. The first Hellboy story within this story is Sullivan's Reward. The year is 1960 in Kansas. Hellboy meets a Mr. Sullivan in a diner. Mr. Sullivan explains that he was a drunk. He lost everything, his family, his job, his home, until one day a stranger appeared, and the stranger looked like a lawyer. And that stranger gave Mr. Sullivan the deed to a house. So Mr. Sullivan, he ended up moving to that house. And he learned that if he put a person in a certain room in that house, the house would kill that person and pay Mr. Sullivan a few coins of gold. The house, it was like it craved people. And Mr. Sullivan, he couldn't ignore that craving the house had. So over the next few years, he kept luring people to the house. The house would kill them and give Mr. Sullivan some more coins. All the people Mr. Sullivan lured were people that wouldn't be missed. And for every victim, the house would pay him. Mr. Sullivan then brings Hellboy to the house, and he wants Hellboy's help. He tells Hellboy, "You don't understand. It's the house. It's making me do it. It's making me bring people here." As Hellboy and Sullivan walk through the house, Hellboy notices a painting of an old man. He asks, "Who is this guy?" It turns out that the man in the painting is the creator of the house. Mr. Sullivan says, "It's his money that comes down these stairs here every time someone dies in that room." Hellboy and Mr. Sullivan go up the stairs, and then they go check out this room that usually Mr. Sullivan leaves people in and then they die. And as soon as Hellboy steps into the room, Mr. Sullivan double-crosses him. He shoots Hellboy a couple times, and then he slams the door shut, expecting the house to kill Hellboy. As Hellboy is trapped in that room, he sees the spirit of the creator of the house there, praying to some dark gods. And then that spirit of the creator of the house tries to attack and kill Hellboy. And Mr. Sullivan on the other side of the door, he smiles maniacally. He says to himself, "I did it! Master, you paid me for all those other shambling drunks and prostitutes I lured here. But what about him? What will you give me for him?" Hellboy is by far the most exciting being that Mr. Sullivan has ever lured to the house. And the house does indeed pay Mr. Sullivan for the level of gift he gave him. Mr. Sullivan is waiting at the bottom of the stairs for his coins for Hellboy, and some coins do come. An entire, what seems like a truckload full of coins. They start tumbling down the stairs at such velocity that Mr. Sullivan gets crushed to death under the weight of all those gold coins. Hellboy, though, he's still fighting for his life, fighting against the house. Hellboy manages to smash his way out of the room, but the house is still trying to kill him. The house is also warning Hellboy, saying, "Get out of my house! Get out! Get out!" As Hellboy explores the house, trying to get out of it, he enters a room and he finds the beating heart of the house. Hellboy, with a wooden stake, stabs it into the heart, and then he hammers it down with his right hand of doom. And by doing so, Hellboy successfully kills the spirit of the creator of the house, and the house explodes and crumbles down to rubble. Hellboy, he eventually crawls out of that rubble and escapes for good. The zombies in the movie theater are ready for their second story as part of the double feature. The second story is called The House of Sebek. Hellboy is in a university museum in Massachusetts. A crazy man there claims to be a pharaoh, and he somehow is able to bring mummies there in that museum back to life. Hellboy, he easily fights these mummies and pounds them down to dust. The fake pharaoh then flees throughout the museum. He ends up entering a temple to a god named Sebek that was constructed in that museum. The problem is, though, this fake pharaoh, he prays to a god named Horus, which is different than Sebek. And Egyptian gods, like many gods, don't like when you pray to other gods that aren't them. So the pharaoh, he starts praying to Horus to protect him from his enemies and destroy them. This angers the god Sebek, which is like a crocodile god, and it comes to life and eats the man. When Hellboy finally arrives in the room where this statue of this god Sebek is, it is just reverted back to a statue now, although it has blood from where it ate the man earlier. Hellboy, he comments, "I guess that's Sebek. You know, it's never a good idea to piss off a god with an alligator head." And back in the movie theater, the zombies watching this double feature clap as the show ends. Our final short story in this Short Stories Omnibus, Volume 1, is called Iron Shoes. It is set in the year 1961. Art by Mike Mignola, colors by James Sinclair. In the year 1961, in Ireland, there once lived a bloodthirsty goblin, one of the most bloodthirsty, who lived in a ruined tower. This goblin was special because most goblins and fairy creature have a weakness to iron, but not this goblin, and that is how this goblin earned the name Iron Shoes. So Hellboy, he went to Ireland and he went to this ruined tower to try and track this goblin down. When Hellboy enters the tower, he is attacked by the goblin. The goblin jumps at Hellboy, trying to kick him with his iron shoes on. But Hellboy manages to dodge out of the way, and then with a lasso, he manages to rope up Iron Shoes and yank him out of the tower. Hellboy then drags the goblin to a nearby church. And as Hellboy enters the church with that goblin and the church bell tolls, Iron Shoes crumbles to dust, apparently weak from the sound of the ringing of the bell in that holy place. So the goblin disintegrates, only leaving his iron shoes behind. Hellboy, he talks to the priest there, and he leaves the shoes with the church's priest. And the story ends with Hellboy leaving and the shoes sitting next to the statue there in that church. And with this, we end the first Hellboy Short Stories Omnibus. Alright, so that was the Short Stories Omnibus. Let me go through my thoughts on the various short stories in this volume here. So first, Pancakes, short tale, although kind of fun. Hellboy in a diner eating pancakes. We're getting a tease of some of the storylines to come. Not bad, although very short. The Midnight Circus, I thought, had amazing artwork. Although one thing about that story is that I feel like you can greater appreciate it once you've already read the main Hellboy saga, because you know who Astaroth and Hellboy's sister are, whereas when you're going through it initially, if you're reading it in this chronological order here, you won't get as much out of it as you could. The nature of the beast with that dragon that Hellboy slays for this Osiris Club. Once again, a little bit of a tease for some future stuff to come. King Vold, I thought, was a fun story of this guy scheming to get Hellboy to do this job for him, and he gets kind of caught out in the end, and he gets a gold coin through his hand, and now he has a hole there. The Hellboy in Mexico stuff was all really fun. I love the different vibe there, having these luchador wrestlers and drinking tequila and fighting all these evil monsters. You know, just really fun. Great stuff. I love the use of the wrestling in here. The Aztec Mummy story was kind of a throwaway one. Hellboy getting married was really fun, because, you know, he actually got married. Yeah, sort of. And that was his wife. And I thought it was pretty funny how she was like this demon, and Hellboy, you know, escapes her. And, you know, the subversion of expectations on that one. And then I liked in the next story arc how Hellboy is referencing his wife, and the Mexican guy in the bar is like, oh yeah, we've all been there with the lizard on the ring. The Coffin Man story arc was kind of fun, how Hellboy, he loses in that one, and he does not succeed. The Coffin Man beats him twice. And then the House of the Living Dead one was also pretty cool, how they just shoved in like all of these different monsters. The Frankenstein, the zombie, a whole bunch of stuff. That was all honestly pretty fun, but like a Mexican spin on it. Great stuff. Then the Crooked Man story arc, which was fantastic. Easily my favorite story arc in this short story volume. Just a horrific tale. I love the setting. The Crooked Man was scary. Overall, it was scary. You know, there's some scenes where you see like the woman's skin and the raccoon crawls into it. It's just horrifying. And but great horror stuff. The next one, the Penanggalan, that was a throwaway story to me. The Corpse, I thought was okay, although we are introduced to some important characters that are going to come back later, like this Grugach and Alice Monaghan, so setting some stuff up for the future there. The double feature of Evil One, I thought, I love the tale with the haunted house, and it was giving coins for whenever this guy brought over people, and the house would kill those people. And I love the twist ending where he brings in Hellboy, and the house throws a whole bunch of coins, and the guy gets crushed to death by them. So that was really fun. And Iron Shoes was just a quick kind of throwaway tale. But yeah, all these stories were pretty fun, and if they weren't great, they were usually pretty short, so it was already over, and you were on to the next one already anyway. Yeah, great stuff. I'm going to give this volume an 8.5 out of 10. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Which story was your favorite? And I will see you all in the future with the Hellboy Omnibus Short Stories Volume 2.